Who is AncientGreymon? When we talk about AncientGreymon, it's hard for me to even know where to start when it comes to discussing this behemoth of a Digimon. I say so because this one has been so impactful, not just throughout the Greymon-Species evolutionary line, but also in its contribution of the story behind what is known as the ancient digital world. So I'd say, let me start by saying the following. First, you have to understand that while WarGreymon is considered the peak modern mega-level form of the standard Greymon line, AncientGreymon predates them all by essentially a millennia if we were to take into account Digimon history, and as far as I know, none is actually more powerful than this one. AncientGreymon can be deemed as the ancient mythical ancestor and primordial founder of the entire Greymon species, serving as a supreme mega predecessor whose fire-based powers and fighting spirit were passed down not just to the Greymon line, but also to modern dragon and dinosaur Digimon, to an extent. I already have to make a bit of a side note here, because there is another thing that needs to be clarified. You see, while it is written and actually said that AncientGreymon and its 9 other peers passed down their powers, that doesn't mean that the Digimon in their era, meaning in the ancient digital world, couldn't already use the power of the elements. In the case of AncientGreymon, when we say that it passed down its powers, it means that, particularly for dinosaur and dragon type Digimon, they inherited aspects of that ancient power, including the ability to manifest fire-based abilities. However, there is an important distinction to be made. That doesn't mean that every dragon or dinosaur Digimon automatically had the fire element. Every single Digimon went through a process of evolution which was heavily dependent on the genetics and the environment they grew up in. And we've already made a huge video talking about the various types of dragon and dinosaurs inside the Digimon multiverse, and you will see that the differences are enormous. So I'd say that when it comes to the transference of power, that it is better understood as a lineage of inherited power. AncientGreymon passed down its power, and that power could eventually appear in different ways among its descendants and related Digimon. And the same could also be told about the other members among the legendary warriors who we are going to go through in their own video. So, the ancient digital world should not be viewed as a time before elemental powers existed. Elemental powers were already part of the digital world's ancient history. AncientGreymon simply represents one of the clearest examples of an ancient Digimon whose elemental power was passed down to later generations. In other words, when we see a modern dinosaur or dragon Digimon using fire, we can potentially view that ability as part of a much older evolutionary and power lineage stretching all the way back to the ancient digital world. However, this would mean that some Digimon would have inherited more of AncientGreymon's grand powers. That would be those of the Greymon line, and you can see clear influences of AncientGreymon throughout the line. There's a reason why most Greymon species walk around with 3 horns. It began with AncientGreymon, but you can also simply check the names of the attacks, as that's usually how the developers show the relations between Digimon. And just a side note, that's also why that one video about Gotsumon was about 50 minutes long. I checked all possible links it had to its ancestor Ancient Volcamon, and there were plenty. But so, AncientGreymon has a move called Gaia Tornado. It's a move where it gathers the spirit of the land and creates a tornado to swallow up the opponent and blow them away. WarGreymon has its known move Gaia Force, where it creates this giant ball of energy taken from the atmosphere, and it can create itself a tornado, where it spins at tremendous speed. That is how it killed Metal Seedramon in the Adventure universe. But these are already 2 moves that you can see coming back in the Greymon line, starting from AncientGreymon to its descendant WarGreymon. That's an origin. Another move AncientGreymon has is named Omega Burst, where it induces a super detonation over the surrounding kilometers alongside an intense flash. You can retrieve the word Omega in it, and Omnimon's second name is Omegamon. Of course, you may argue that it is a fusion, a DNA digivolution, which is fair, but still it is a gestalt entity that cannot be born if it's not for a WarGreymon who is a descendant of AncientGreymon. Also, Omnimon gave its powers to Shoutmon to make it become Omni-Shoutmon, or we could even say Omega Shoutmon, who can use the Omega In-Force, which is a force making the user theoretically impossible to defeat. And while being combined with Omnimon's power, Omni-Shoutmon can use devastating flaming abilities, which, historically speaking, would have come all the way from AncientGreymon. To get back to AncientGreymon's moves, in the Omega Burst attack, we can take the word burst from it. And we can also go to its next move, which is called Omega Corona, from which we are going to take the word Corona from, as this one will take us straight to Shine Greymon, who has itself a burst mode, where it can temporarily use solar class high energy flames. It can also use the Corona Blaze Sword, and if you listen well, you can hear the word Corona coming back along with the word burst. So I'd say that, genetically speaking, the way it goes, AncientGreymon's offsprings, those who have inherited a good chunk of its powers, are those of the Greymon line. However, even among the line, there were some elected favorites, so-called heirs of AncientGreymon's grand abilities. I'm talking about Burning Greymon and Agunimon, all of which are part of the Greymon line. Yes, even Agunimon, who has a bit of a different name, as we don't hear a Greymon in it. Though that doesn't matter, because otherwise you'd say that Samudramon isn't part of the Greymon line, while it pretty much is. Samudramon is definitely part of the Greymon line. Heck, it even has a move called Gaia Reactor, where it concentrates all the energy within the atmosphere and then detonates it. In its move is written the word Gaia, a word coming back to its ancestor AncientGreymon. Anyway, when you pay close attention to AncientGreymon's appearance, you will see that AncientGreymon looks like a combination of both its heirs, Burning Greymon and Agunimon. It is as if its form contained physical features from the human and beast spirit Digimon of Flame. AncientGreymon has Burning Greymon's face, torso, legs and flaming wings, then it has Agunimon's shoulder guards, arms and feet to form its front limbs, and it has Agunimon's long spiky hair. What appears to be the Rudria Darpana is attached to both sides of its body. And for those who do not know what it is, the Rudria Darpana is an incredible superweapon that can fire lasers that rival a solar heat ray. Burning Greymon carries that weapon, and also Aldamon. And speaking of Aldamon, in the modern digital world, this one has inherited all the might of AncientGreymon and acquired even its unknown abilities. Both AncientGreymon and Aldamon should in theory be equal in strength, though I am going to take it a little bit with a grain of salt, and I'm going to go through this topic once we discuss the modern legendary warriors. There's something else of great importance that I need to add here. I just told you that AncientGreymon passed down its powers to dragon and dinosaur type Digimon, so my question now is, where does that put Dracomon then? Because remember, Dracomon is the progenitor of all Dragon-type Digimon. That's why in the thumbnail of the Explaining Dragon-type video, you can see Dracomon in the middle and linked to all other types of dragons and dinosaurs. I may have an answer to that question. You see, when discussing the origins of Dragon-type Digimon, there is an important distinction between Dracomon and AncientGreymon because they represent two different aspects of Digimon ancestry. Dracomon is described as the progenitor of Dragon-type Digimon. This means that its importance lies in the dragon lineage itself. Dracomon represents an ancient root from which the Dragon-type species developed, and you will recognize that by the name Dramon that usually comes back. Sea Dramon, Ground Dramon, Heavy Metal Dramon, etc. AncientGreymon, however, has a different role. It is one of the 10 legendary warriors of the ancient digital world and actually represents the element of fire, and it is that elemental power that was passed down to later generations of Digimon, particularly dinosaur and dragon-type Digimon. Therefore, AncientGreymon does not necessarily need to be the biological ancestor of Dracomon or of every dragon-type Digimon. Instead, its contribution is the ancient elemental power and legacy that became part of the abilities inherited by later Digimon. So in simple terms, we can say the following. Dracomon represents the dragon lineage, and AncientGreymon represents the ancient power of fire inherited by later dragon and dinosaur Digimon, while, through time, still having its own evolutionary line, bringing us to Agumon, Greymon, and a lot of them. This also means that the dragon and dinosaur type Digimon could potentially possess elemental abilities without directly descending from AncientGreymon. Their species ancestry and their elemental heritage are two different concepts. So in short, Dracomon represents the ancestral dragon lineage, while AncientGreymon represents an ancient source of elemental firepower that influenced later generations of Digimon. With that being said, now, when it comes to AncientGreymon, lore-wise, you have to understand that it was never really given, let us say, an quote-unquote active role in modern stories, for reasons that aren't really complicated. As an ancient Digimon, along with its peers, it was a bit meant to remain a mysterious figure to let us Digimon fans play with our imagination, so to speak. You're never going to see AncientGreymon play the central role in the story because it is meant to remain sort of like a relic of the past, who had already fulfilled its role and had already contributed in Digimon evolution, and now has sort of reached the level of legends, and it's up to the newer generation to fight for a better tomorrow. But because each universe within the Digimon multiverse can be deemed as what-if universes of each other, there usually is an ancient digital world era somewhere within the timeline. And in general, across the Digimon multiverse and their various timelines, when the 10 legendary warriors fought to save the ancient digital world, AncientGreymon is supposed to be the only one to survive along with ancient Garurumon. Now, I say supposed to because, as I said in the Digimon Multiverse video, you should see all, if not most, Digimon universes as what-if stories from each other. What-if stories with one or multiple elements changed, leading to completely new stories. Let me give you an example. In the Digimon Frontier universe, there was a big war against Lucimon, who eventually had gotten itself sealed. AncientGreymon and ancient Garurumon were the only ones to have survived. But on the other hand, when you take the Digimon Ghost Game story, who in the multiverse video was its own universe, you have ancient Sphinxmon who somehow survived the ancient digital world. In fact, because ancient Sphinxmon is confirmed to have survived, it leaves the narrative door wide open to assume that maybe the other 10 legendary warriors could still be alive and wandering somewhere in that universe. But as the godlike entities they are, they rarely show themselves. Take the Digimon Collectors story. We talked about it in the multiverse video, so I'm not going to say much about the story, but I'm going to say the following. It takes place in a modern-style digital world tied to contemporary network lore, operating under the governance of Yggdrasil. The 10 legendary warriors are all of them still alive, and they live in almost inaccessible locations near Bite Island, minding their own business. So over there they're still alive. In the cases where AncientGreymon did perish, it still did appear on occasions as a counselor or as a force that can be summoned, sometimes through prayer or harsh emotions. In the Digimon Frontier revival of the Ancient Digimon story, AncientGreymon and ancient Garurumon were revived to battle against Ornismon, a Digimon that went on a rampage through the digital world. And I believe it happened in a time after the Great War against Lucimon. I know I talked about it in detail in the multiverse video, but for now I can't really remember it, but I do know that it was defeated and sealed away by both AncientGreymon and ancient Garurumon. In the one-shot manga called Digimon Get Back, AncientGreymon doesn't appear as a living being, but instead its spirit manifested itself, speaking directly into the mind of Taro Osanai. It challenged his understanding of true strength, and once his resolve was proven, it revealed the final Digi-key of courage before fading back into the stone. The story isn't really known, even if the potential was certainly there, so to briefly tell you what the Digi-key is, it basically holds the inherited power of the 10 legendary warriors and serves two major functions. First, gathering all 5 keys allows the Digidestined to activate a holy altar that completely purges Skull Satamon's dark fog from the digital world. And that dark fog was destroying the digital world, so it had to be stopped, but the Digidestined didn't immediately know how. I would say that it's possible that this version of Skull Satamon is its strongest. Second, The key acts as a massive power catalyst, as when a tamer unlocks their core trait, their Digi-key allows their partner to instantly warp evolve straight to Mega, such as Agumon, who evolved into Dynamon. But so, this is AncientGreymon for you, one of the strongest non-fusion Digimon across the multiverse, but one who probably never is going to take center stage because it represents the past, along with its peers. It represents the older generation that sometimes lends its wisdom and powers to those in need.